Right.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rasheen. It's a real pleasure to be able to do this event with the Chevy Chase Community Association. It's the association that brings all of our civil society organizations together under a single umbrella in the neighborhood. So they're very important in that way, and we're delighted to be part of that community. And we're here to talk about Windows 250. Windows 250 is a public education project designed to encourage our community of Chevy Chase DC to ponder the meaning of our country's founding document, the Declaration of Independence, for our neighborhood today. It gets its name from the impending 250th anniversary of the Declaration and the exhibition that is placed in the windows of local businesses on Upper Connecticut Avenue. Tonight, we'll hear from 4 members of a team that realized the project over the course of 2024. I'll start with some comments on the conceptual origins of the project as a member of the ANC 34G Standing Committee on Racial and Social Equity. So this is a raised project, actually. And I'll be identifying co-sponsors and members of the creative team and our business associates as well. And I'll offer a very brief overview of the images and narrative elements constituting the project. Then I'll defer to project historians, Dr. Mark Auslander and Kate Atkinson, and Jocelyn Julian, 8th generation descendant of Mount Vernon servant Caroline Branham, whose family is one of the 2 families with direct links to George Washington, who lived among us in Chevy Chase from the 1840s until their displacement in 1931 to accommodate a racially exclusive school and park. Each of the panelists will convey an aspect of the story that we present from colonial times to the present. And indeed, it is the fact that the whole arc of American history is represented locally in our Chevy Chase neighborhood that inspired us to organize this public exhibition around the question, what can we do locally to redeem the promises of our country's founding declaration? The exhibit raises a question. It does not seek to provide a definitive answer. Its purpose is rather to invite us all to reflect on our common purpose in light of the path that we have taken to the present. On that basis, we hope that the choices we make locally going forward will be better informed. The mission was defined in conversations in the ANC Raised Committee in January and February of 2024. A proposal was developed and adopted by the ANC in March. The ANC funded the project in September, and a soft opening with the participation of Ward 3 Councilmember Matt Fruman on Chevy Chase Day took place later that month. In the months between January and September last year, the fundamental design features were worked out. We were led to adopt a hybrid model, linking engaging images and captions to a complete formulation online, accessible by QR codes attached to each of the posters that we produce, placed in the windows of the businesses on our main street. The fuller history behind the images had to be written. That was done with the assistance of an advisory group of academics whose focus is DC history, together with a widely published policy analyst and local leaders of a citizens association and a parallel project in a nearby neighborhood. So Windows 250 is a community project. It germinated in the ANC Raised Committee, but found enthusiastic support by historic Chevy Chase DC, which contributed the images and research for the narrative, and by Chevy Chase Main Street, connected to District Bridges, which served as our liaison to the business community. So what I'm going to do now is offer a quick tour of the exhibit so that we have a point of reference as each of our panelists weighs in on a particular aspect of the project. What you'll note is that all of the posters that I'll be showing you in a second have 6 elements in them. There's a project description, a logo, there's an image, a caption corresponding to the image, a list of sponsors, and the QR code to convey the viewer online to the complete project narrative, which has the gallery and the project description as well. So who are our panelists? First, Dr. Mark Auslander. He's in this capacity a Windows 250 project historian, a historical anthropologist by training, who grew up in our neighborhood and is presently on the faculty of American University. Kate Atkinson, Vice President of Historic Chevy Chase DC, and a project historian, and also the website designer for Windows 250. And finally, but certainly not least, we feature Jocelyn Julian, an 8th generation descendant of Caroline Branham, a house servant for George Washington at Mount Vernon, whose family moved to Chevy Chase only to be displaced in 1931 to make way for a racially exclusive school and park. So that said, let me first bring up a slide about credits, right? Every project deserves to share with whoever is viewing it, the people that were involved in it. And I've already mentioned most of the people involved here, but since this is going to be recorded, you'll be able to see this in retrospect as well. Here's the first slide that we have, and you'll notice that the slide was also the logo for the project. This slide represents George Pointer, who was born into slavery in 1773, before our country became independent, was able to buy his freedom some 19 years later while working for George Washington in the precursor to the C&O Canal. And what this picture shows is George Pointer piloting with his granddaughter a canal barge on opening day of the C&O on July 4th, 1828. Sitting in the barge, not in the picture, is President John Quincy Adams. So we take this as the logo for our 250 event. We also will be talking about the families that settled. These were free African Americans on Broad Branch Road, living in the midst of enslaved people as well. That is part of our discussion. The family of at least one of those settling African American families had 2 members that joined the colored troops of the U.S., the first Black Brigades, after the emancipation, 9 months in advance of general emancipation of slaves in the U.S. This was in 1862. We wanted to make sure that we covered the modern development of Chevy Chase DC, which was the proximate cause for the displacement of these families. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. We wanted to make sure that you knew as well that not everybody bought into the Jim Crow arrangements that characterized Chevy Chase DC and its modern founding. So there's some discussion about that as well. So there's it's a presentation that has many dark areas, but there are some areas of light as well. And the fact that we had people working in the opposite direction was one of them. Another one, of course, is the rediscovery of this history and the lessons that we have begun to learn from it. And this begins with a chance discovery of the ancestry related to the land. In 2015, there was a reunion by the descendants of the Pointer family here. Ultimately, that led us to a process by which the park, which had been known as Lafayette Park and Recreation Center, to be renamed in 2021 to Lafayette Pointer Park and Recreation Center. And this is a picture of eighth generation descendant from George Pointer, James Fisher, who sadly is not with us anymore, but was obviously present for the ribbon cutting with local dignitaries taking part, including the mayor. James went on to become an articulate exponent of the project and of the story that we're telling this evening. And that leaves us, of course, with the question of once we know about this story, one of many stories in our neighborhood, but one is particularly appropriate, we believe, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our founding. So what do we do with that knowledge? So these are the sorts of questions that we're going to be asking. You can get to this project online in its fullness by clicking on that QR code there. So without any further ado, I'm going to now end my slide share and ask Mark to weigh in. Mark, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Carl. That was fantastic. It's so moving every time we walk by the posters and engage with community people who are interested in the history. I will mention, as Carl noted, that I grew up in this neighborhood from age 4 through 18. I lived in Chevy Chase, and my sister and I attended from kindergarten through 6th grade the very school, Lafayette Elementary School, that Carl talked about, utterly oblivious to its history of racial exclusion. And I've really sort of, I think I've spent now decades, but with a lot of help from my colleagues and the descendants in historic Chevy Chase DC, kind of rethinking that history. Even in, from my African-American and white teachers at Lafayette, even then, we spent a lot of time thinking about 1776 and the Declaration of Independence. And I was, in a general sense, aware of the fundamental contradictions. Even if we look at the committee that drafted the Declaration of Independence, this is, say, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, were arrayed along a continuum of debate over the centrality of the enslavement system in the United States. And of course, as many of you know, the very placement, moving the nation's capital from Philadelphia down to what would become Washington, D.C., between the Potomac and the Eastern Branch, had everything to do with the slavery system, with desire for the slave power to have more central control over the nation's capital. And if I knew that in general, but I had no understanding of how this particular neighborhood, which as I was growing up was overwhelmingly white and had its own exclusivist racial politics, not still racially restrictive covenants, but all sorts of messages about who was welcome and who wasn't, that had a particular long history. And so we'd like to talk a little bit tonight about the depth of that history, which goes back certainly to 1725, when Colonel Joseph Belt, a prosperous planter, was given a land patent from Lord Baltimore. This is 1725, so precisely 300 years ago this year, to create a plantation, which he named Chevy Chase, which was expanded from 500 to 1,000 acres, and which was based on enslaved labor. We've been working on identifying the enslaved people that worked in this land. Initially, when the local political economy was centered on tobacco, but as the tobacco economy begins to run into crisis, that opens up certain kinds of spaces. And while a brutal slavery system continued in the area, it also opened up possibilities for people to self-liberate themselves. One of those spaces was, in fact, the new canal project that was being developed by George Washington and his backers to open up the wealth of the Allegheny and region and connect it into the port in Georgetown that depended on enslaved labor, but also, as Carl mentioned, opened up the possibility of enslaved people sometimes purchasing their own freedom. And Captain George Porter, who had enormous skill, partly was able to do that. But it's also true that many other free people of color who had acquired their freedom either in Georgetown or in some cases in Annapolis, we know in Anne Arundel County, then were able to move into the land that's now historic Chevy Chase DC. The first person we have record of in 1813 was John Hutton.
Good stuff.
What's that? Yeah. John Hutton, Hutton, who acquires land that's now along Caseta and Rittenhouse, kind of in the heart of Chevy Chase DC, and eventually his daughter passes that land on to John Hepburn and Elizabeth Hepburn, who are free Black landowners who then subdivide it, and that land also stays under free Black control remarkably long. Small farming communities almost up to the eve of World War II. And then a few blocks from that, as we've talked about the story that we'll hear about from Jocelyn of Dry Meadows Farm, initially acquired around 1840 by the Milburn brothers, a free Black community, is then set up. And one of George Pointer's descendants, his granddaughter, is able to purchase that land. Other land is sold. And what this means is we have an extraordinary set of at least two free Black communities right here in Chevy Chase from 1813 onwards, and then especially by 1850. So in that late antebellum period and then into the post-slavery period, a community that was proud, people took care of each other, and we're dealing with an encroaching sort of racialized corporate system that we're going to hear about from Kate and Carl that found many ways to alienate that land. And I think it's so important when we think about what are our responsibilities as our neighbors to create a more just and equitable society right here, to remember that there are many neighbors whose land this was, who had legal title to the land in Dry Meadows Farm and the Hepburn Tract especially, for generations in some cases, and through tax arrears and rather sophisticated debt arrangements. And then ultimately, as we'll hear about in Jocelyn's case, ultimately, even for those families that were tenacious and hardworking and wouldn't, as it were, sell out, finally, eminent domain was exercised by the district in order to create an all-white segregated elementary school in the adjacent park. So there is a kind of, it seems to us, a kind of hole in this neighborhood. There's a lot of proud history, but there's a sense of loss. I mean, think of the great generational wealth that should have been passed on through generations of Black families who were proud landowners who helped to create the landscape of this neighborhood that we love, but who were ultimately denied ownership through means, in some cases, skirting the law, in some cases, clearly illegal, in other cases, the really illegitimate application of governmental power to create an all-white enclave in this part of Upper Northwest. So it's an extraordinary story. We keep on uncovering new aspects of it, and it's just thrilling to see these posters that honor some of that history and open up everyday new questions for us to continue to explore. And now I think I'll hand things over to Kate, and we'll talk a little bit more about these stories of land loss, dispossession, and how we try to build a movement towards justice right here in the neighborhood.
All right, thank you, Mark and Carl. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the rediscovery of this story of Black land loss. And then after Jocelyn speaks with us a bit, I'll come back and talk about why that matters, why all this should apply to us today, given that, all the instigators of it are dead and gone by now. But, when we talk about rediscovery, that implies that something was lost. But really, this story was more willfully forgotten than lost. We have a few documents that talk about it. Lafayette Life is one. In the preface of this book, there's a discussion about Black families who lived nearby. And that was produced in 1990, I think. And then we have this Origins, which came from the 70s or 80s. And it also talks about Black families who lived here. But we, as a historical society, found that shocking. We did not realize that this had been going on. I guess what shocked us the most was it was not a passive story. We found out that these people who lived here, African Americans, were basically pushed out through a number of means, like Mark just mentioned. The Jim Crow pressures were a big one. People were pushed out for tax arrears. It just became very uncomfortable when this white suburban development hopped over the Western Avenue, and they started building up in DC, and that was around 1907. But I just want to tie this pointer together. So Mark mentioned that the little girl in that painting that Dick Schwartz has done for us, he's a local artist. That little girl, when she reached about age 20, she and her husband moved over to this area that had already been settled by a couple of Black African-American brothers, the Milburns. And just across the way, not even a block and a half, there was another family, two or three people who lived in another enclave. But by the 1940s, all of those landowners were gone. And then it was forgotten. Even the Washington Post by 1940 wrote a story about how thriving and wonderful the park and the school were. And wasn't it a shame that it was just a barren piece of land before then? But it was hardly barren, because for more than 100 years, these families lived there, raised generations of children. Then early in the 20-teens, two historians picked up and started researching the story of this guy, George Pointer. This is the book that Georgetown Press published about it. And they were looking up this guy, George Pointer, who had written I believe it was a 12-page letter that was stuffed away in the National Archives. Had they not found it, we probably wouldn't be talking about it today, because it revealed a lot about this remarkable man who bought his own freedom. At the same time they were doing that research, people from his descendants, actually, they didn't know that they were descended from him, but his descendants were doing genealogical work, and they were tracing back to their relatives. And on Ancestry.com, the two historians and the family found each other. We got wind of this, and we did an oral history. You can read it on our website, about James Fisher, who was a 8th generation direct descendant of George Pointer. And just that window into these families got us working furiously on trying to understand how this happened and how it wasn't a passive action that took place. So one of the things we did, and I'll turn this over to Jocelyn, who can tell you more about the families who lived on Broad Branch Road. But one of the things that we did to try to better understand this was we partnered with the University of the District of Columbia to do an oral history project of 8 descendants of these families who lived on Broad Branch Road. Because what we were trying to understand is, what are the generational effects of Black land loss? And where do we as a community, how can we better understand that? How can we better understand our direct history there? Was very, very interesting and revealing. And again, it's on our website. read about what these descendants are saying. I mean, they are living, breathing connections today to what went on there a century ago. But I'll let Jocelyn tell you more about that.
Thank you, Kate. I had to figure out where the mute button was. Well, good evening, everybody. I am Jocelyn Julian, and I am the fourth great granddaughter of Caroline Branham. My fourth great grandmother was enslaved by George and Martha Washington, excuse me, at Mount Vernon in Virginia. She toiled in Washington's home for most of her life. Then, upon Martha Washington's death, she was uprooted and sent to live at Arlington with their grandson, George Washington Parke Custis, with whom she bore bore my third great grandfather, Austin Branham. Caroline did not have a say in where she was to live, what clothes to wear, or whose children she should bear. And this, in my research, begins the agony of seeing families, my family, uprooted generation after generation after generation. Caroline's great granddaughter and my great grandmother, Rosa Branham, was born in 1882 on her family's property located at Arlington Estate. After her mother's death in the latter 1800s, Rosa and her siblings, Sarah and her two brothers, went to live with their aunt and uncle, Laura Henry and Robert Dorsey. They lived there on Broad Branch Road, where Robert Dorsey built a home, which you see, let's see if I can do this right, in the background. He built this two-story home on his own with the help of family members. And it was a tight-knit Black community at that point. He built the house, and then as the family grew, he built an extension, which is in my impression just so ahead of the times right then. But Laura Dorsey, my great grandmother's aunt, was the community's grocer. And as my grandmother says, she kept all the figures in her head and was sharp as a tack. But she sold their produce, their chickens, and any other type of goods and wares that the community needed. They went to school. My great grandmother and her siblings went to school. They worshiped, they worked, and played on their land. My grandmother, Anna Shorter, was born at Dry Meadows to Rosa and her husband, Richard Shorter. She grew up with a great sense of pride in her home and community, so much so that she used her camera to chronicle her everyday life. And she went around and took pictures of the children that were playing in their backyard, of her mother and father, and of her schoolmates. In any event, so much so that in 1931, however, all that changed. Through eminent domain, as we have discussed, they were forced to remove themselves from the land. They were forced off, they were away from their friends, away from some of their family members. In fact, their church, they lost it all to make ways, as you all know, for a school and a public park. And I was astonished, and thanks be to Kate, she'd given me this article from the Evening Star, March 4th, 1931, where it says, and I quote, "The district commissioners yesterday approved the purchase of a lot of land improved by a frame dwelling adjoining the Lafayette School, now under construction at Broad Branch Road and Oliver Street." Excuse me. "The house is occupied by colored tenants. In explaining the reason for the purchase, Assistant Engineer Commissioner H.L. Robb wrote, The presence of this house with its colored occupants so close to a white school is a source of possible friction that is thought desirable to remove. And after I read that statement, I think everything that my grandmother had shared and chronicled and the toils that they went through gave me a new sense of purpose to make sure that their stories were heard. These discriminatory acts of eminent domain have greatly impacted my family throughout many generations. My story and many stories like mine need to be told and to be included in our children's education. Now, I became involved in Black Broad Branch after meeting my fellow historian Tanya Hardy. I was doing a quick Google search and came across her and James Fisher's name and was delighted to see that they were doing work there at Broad Branch. I made contact, and of course, the rest is history. And I've also had the great fortune to come across the paths of many people who are willing to listen to our stories and uplift them. Carl, Kate, Tim, Mark, you all have really been a godsend. And I think my grandmother would be proud to see all the work that we have collectively done. And when I accepted the opportunity to interview with UDC under Dr. Amanda Huron, it took off from there. I participated in an interview with the students and told my story. And I had absolutely no idea where it was going to take me, but between their efforts, Corey Shaw, Mariano Barros-Titus, and a host of many individuals, too numerous to name here, historic Chevy Chase DC and these wonderful individuals, I've been able to tell my story and learn more. I've even learned more. I've participated in many endeavors since beginning this journey. On June 15th, 2023, I provided testimony before DC Council member Kenyon McDuffie in support of B 250152, Reparations Foundation Fund and Task for Establishment Act of 2023. And I'm proud of its success and hope that more work will continue shortly. I've also been able to network with oral historians, educators, and community there in the area. And last year, and I'm so proud of this, I was asked to participate in a short film entitled Diminished Returns, The Black Wealth Gap in DC, directed by Dr. Sabia Prince, noted anthropologist, artist, and filmmaker, which of course appeared in the Washington Post recently with my face on there. Who knew? But I'm absolutely delighted and awestruck of where this has taken the story. So where do we go from here? We keep our stories alive. We continue to expand school curriculum, guided lessons to teach our youth about our stories, partner with colleges and universities to conduct their oral histories of the community there, and continue to work toward reparations for the Black Broad Branch descendants and others in the community. But I want to thank you all most endearingly for joining and listening to my story. It's a small story in the scheme of everyone else's story, but I'm awful proud of it and will tell it to anybody who will lend an ear. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Jocelyn's family was the last holdout on Lafayette Point, the Lafayette Park, and that was, she said, 1931. Others were gone before then, pushed out in various means that I mentioned earlier. And then that's where a lot of our knowledge of this dropped off. The question is today, what do we do with this knowledge? Like, how does it impact us? The kids at Lafayette Elementary School have done studies on sections on learning about this history, and it has moved them to political activism in some ways. They helped us get the name of the park changed to Lafayette Pointer Park, just to acknowledge that this history, that these other people once lived here and it was once their space. But that's one thing we can do. I think we as historians want to educate the community about our past so that you can make better decisions, that we can all make better decisions about our future. And one of the things that, we get a lot is, that was the past. It's over now. It's not a racially exclusive community. But the only thing that's over is that all those people who did directly lead to this are dead and gone. But what still remains is that every Chevy Chase DC homeowner is enriched by this community that this kind of exclusive policy created. And we have the opportunity here to build generational wealth. So that is what is still here. And the other thing that is still here, as Jocelyn just talked about, was the pain inflicted on the families who were displaced. Some feel this pain in ways other than just a memory. We have to think about what it means for our actions in the future. It was an opportunistic action that led to this. And so that is important for us to know and move into the future, which is what led this development of the 250s project to revisit what the promises are of the Declaration of Independence. And on a local level, how can we address that? It's good to know these things. And Carl, I'll let you take it up from here.
Well, thanks, Kate. I mean, I think the only thing that I'd add is just a brief commentary about how we got to that point between 1892, when the Chevy Chase Land Company opened the first homes, sold off the first property for development north of Chevy Chase Circle, and 1907, when the same thing happened on the DC side of the line, through the 1940s. So this was undertaken, of course, by Francis Newlands, who got very lucky in life. He got lucky in the sense that he went off, like so many, to seek his fortune on the West Coast. And as a young budding lawyer, he managed to enter a network that connected him with the family of the silver fortune, the Comstock Lode family, and married the daughter, married the heiress. And so Francis Newlands went immediately from becoming the billionaire of the day, really. He first was assigned the role of running the estate, and then he inherited the estate because his wife then died and his father-in-law died. So he had to decide what he was going to do with all the millions upon millions that he had, and he charted out two ideas for himself. One of them was he wanted to become a developer. He started that development process actually in Reno, Nevada, not accidentally, because that's where the silver came from at the time, even though the family was living in San Francisco, very common event then. And secondly, he wanted to become a politician. His father was one of the first senators from Nevada. His father-in-law, I mean, was one of the first senators from Nevada, and already had land around DuPont Circle. So he was aware of the possibilities for developing land here, and decided that he would develop the land around what would become Connecticut Avenue all the way out into Maryland, buying up 1,700 acres along the way, and then selling them off to willing buyers. But he did that according to a utopian vision that he had about creating a white community, because the man was a white supremacist. In the 1912 presidential election, he put forward a plank for the Democratic National Convention that would have rescinded the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, providing guarantee for voting rights for African Americans. So the community that he wanted to create was very much in line with the Jim Crow reorganization of our society from the post-Reconstruction period, from the late 1870s forward. So that's what we got in Chevy Chase. And if you look at the consequences from the first development in 1892 and then 1907 on the DC side, what you see is the removal of any person of color. This is borne out by forensic research done on the 1940 census, which we have carried out in the meantime. By 1940, the only African-American people that were still in Chevy Chase were either those who were live-in servants in the houses that had cropped up in that first generation, or the custodians of the newly built apartment buildings on Upper Connecticut Avenue. So Newlands was successful in what he did. And with the burgeoning white community, new infrastructure was needed. And that new infrastructure, of course, included schools and parks. And that's where the story of Newlands and the story that we've been talking about already this evening interacts. So that's my contribution. And I think
Carl, it's 7:47. I was thinking we could start taking some questions.
I think it's
the
an excellent idea. Yeah.
If you guys, the panelists could look in the chat, there's a couple of questions. I was just going to ask
I'll
start.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick up on Brian's excellent questions, and we can move on. Brian asked several smart and interesting questions about expanding the narrative, and he's exactly right that what we sort of zeroed in on a very particular story about Dry Meadows Farm and the Hepburn Tract, but of course this is a story found all over district, a long story of racialized, largely but not entirely racialized displacement. But it raises a broader question about American history that goes to the heart of the Windows 250 project, which is that the promise of the American experiment, the possibility of representative self-government, which was initially grounded, of course, on landed white men as voters in a representative democracy, rested on two fundamental dynamics. One was the vast alienation and displacement, and in some cases genocide of Native American people, and the alienation, extraction of the labor of enslaved people of African descent. And then subsequently, a long history of racial politics that continues post the eradication of chattel slavery. So that's the big picture, the eradication, the alienation of the land that's now the District of Columbia from Piscataway and Anacostan and other indigenous peoples. And then the ways that families in slavery and freedom were, especially families of color, were torn apart. And Brian is exactly right about this. If we look at the history of Western High School, or what's now Duke Ellington, or so many other places, the Southwest part of DC, and not only through as it were, the operations of law, but all of these dynamics to do with systematic disinvestment that forced, and then reinvestment that forces out, for example, working class families of color from the Southwest and so forth into Wards 7 and 8. It's a very complex history. Brian also asked us to think about some of the notable members of African-American members of the community more recently, including Julian Bond, who our organization of course worked to create a wonderful bench in his honor. And all of those are important stories about members of the civil rights movement and so forth that were in the neighborhood. All of those are terrific. But I take Brian's point, yes, that absolutely we need to think about this vast history of systematic structural assaults on people, on the integrity of families, on their landowning rights, on their rights as renters as well, that have in many cases been undercut in the city. He asked them complicated questions about reparations that Jocelyn's got us into. All I'll say is these are questions we urgently need to talk about. What does restorative justice look like given this long history of economic dislocation? This is a city of enormous African-American accomplishment and pride going back for centuries. But we also have to remember what was taken, what has been systematically taken away as we think about how we move forward.
I have a question. What are some resources we could use to better educate ourselves about this issue?
Kate, do you want to pick that one up on some of the resources?
Well, about the details of this research, our website has a lot of it. You can also read excerpts from the oral histories of each of these 8 descendants, including Jocelyn, on our website. Black Broad Branch is the keywords basically. Carl, you want to talk about other ways? I mean, are you talking about just locally, Rasheen, or are you talking about in general these issues that Mark has brought up?
I was actually just thinking locally, or just books you guys read in your work compiling all this information.
Yeah, a lot of it's on our website. And, also this book has, tells the Pointer story, which is quite good. We have this on our website. We have all the references to it.
Yeah, I would just add that you already did mention this, Kate, before, but in 1976 at the bicentennial, we had the city government providing neighborhoods with some funds to help celebrate the bicentennial, and our neighborhood actually, in the precursor to the ANCs, gave some of that money to local students from our high school, from Wilson High, I believe, to work on that and produce these books called Origins 2, and there was a third one as well. And I think there's someone on this call that can speak to that. Tim, are you here?
I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, you're coming through.
Yeah, we did. We worked on this years ago when I was a teenager, and it was a fantastic project that turned on a lot of kids to history, including me.
So unfortunately, there's very little written as far as monographs are concerned on the particular situation that developed in Chevy Chase DC. The one book we have is the one that Kate has already shared with you as a very important first step as far as monographs are concerned. I mean, there are others as well that have been written about what's been going on more generally across the city, in particular Chocolate City, was a book that was published by two local authors in 2017 that picks up some of this. One of the more relevant aspects is this discussion of the citizens associations. The Chevy Chase Citizens Association started out in 1909, I believe. And in its initial constitution, it did have a constitution. In its initial constitution, Article 4 specified membership requirements. You had to be 18 years old and you had to be white. So you had to be white in order to be part of the community in Chevy Chase. This was written in the Constitution, and this is how the organization was created and developed. It became the largest citizens association in the district. It had, at one point around 1930, something like 3,000 members. And it was very important in the pre-home rule days for affecting policy development in the district under the commissioner system. So there are some authorities that are available out there, but we need to develop a lot more.
And if I could just add on to that, because Brian has also asked an interesting question about how Plessy v. Ferguson, which through the Supreme Court more or less codified Jim Crow. I think he's asking how it played out in DC. And of course, the citizens associations and the massive Klan procession in the mid-20s and so forth, I mean, are all part of this. But it's important to remember that the imposition of Plessy and Jim Crow was heavily contested here in the city, right? By Black intellectuals, by church people, by teachers, by those in the medical profession. And they organized around to counterbalance the white Citizens Association, predominantly African-American civic associations. And even during the darkest periods when Woodrow Wilson tried to basically destroy the African-American Federal Civil Service and so forth, people did fight back. So there's a very long history of community activism. It's not to discount the enormous effect of those terrible Supreme Court decisions, of which Plessy is the most important. But this is a city of long-term struggle and pride, based in civic organizations and Black churches and other organizations. So there's a lot to be proud of in the city history, while we don't want to of course, ever ignore those terrible judicial decisions.
The other question. How about some closing statements from our panelists, and then we'll wrap things up. Let's go
Did we rename the fountain behind Carl?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
Wasn't the fountain, which is shown behind Carl at Chevy Chase Circle,
Oh, right.
renamed?
Yeah, no, it was not renamed. The fountain was authorized by an act of Congress back around 1932, 33, and there's sometime. Newlands passed from the scene. He died in office as a senator from Nevada in 1917 in office. And his spouse collected some funds in order to create a memorial to him. What you have to understand about Newlands, I'll get to your specific question in just a second, but what you have to understand about Newlands is that he was a progressive as well. Progressive men believed in central government to do things, which was a different political orientation than what had come before, or from around 1890 to 1920 at the height of the progressive movement. And this fusion between racism and progressivism was not unusual at that time, unfortunately. Part of his progressivism, however, was using the federal government to irrigate Western land that didn't have water, right? So it was thought appropriate that the memorial to Newlands should be something about water. So that's how we got the fountain. And the fountain, there is a movement underway to rename the fountain and to remove the elements celebrating Newlands that is being undertaken by the National Park Service over the past few years.
Thank you.
I might just want to add in closing. I mean, I don't know. We talk a lot about this in our group, but that we obviously live in a historical moment where there's enormous attempts to divide us all along lines of race and identity and everything else. And what this little project for us is so beautiful and moving, as Jocelyn has said, is because we're all learning from one another. We all have made mistakes, but we all listen to one another. And it has just been so extraordinary working with the descendants, with Jocelyn and so many others, including the late James Fisher, to be reminded of our better angels, you know, and the value of compassion. There are very powerful people now who are denouncing empathy as somehow antiquated, and we need an upgrade for empathy. But what this reminds us is what's at the heart of a neighborhood, right? It's not just the physical infrastructure and all that, but is people caring for one another. And this, in a small and beautiful way, these little posters, you know, in the CVS and along all the other local businesses, are acts of love and care and compassion and learning and listening. And for me, you know, as a teacher, as an educator, you know, we know all the tough things that are happening to our schools, to our universities, to our public health institutions, and so forth. We don't discount those. But what gives me hope is that little spark of care, of mutual learning, and saying together, we're going to look back in our past together, to rediscover our common humanity, and that becomes the basis of how we're going to move forward here in Chevy Chase and around the country and around the world. So that's what keeps me going, I guess.
Other closing comments? All right, well, it is 1:01. Thank you all for coming. Where can we find out more about Historic Chevy Chase DC?
Kate, can you just remind everybody of the website? Oh, is there Lynette had a question?
I was I had just really learned of it and wonder if there's a way to get a replay of your presentation.
This is being recorded and it will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel.
Oh, very good.
So I'll just weigh in by mentioning to people that you can go to our website. The website is easily findable through Google. Just write Historic Chevy Chase DC as the search term, and you'll come to it immediately. No problem. And I want to take this moment to thank Rasheen and Jory and the team at the Chevy Chase Community Association for sponsoring this event, which we hope will be food for thought going forward. Thank you.
It was a great
Historic
presentation.
Chevy
Thank you.
Chase DC.
All right, I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you all for coming. I hope we see you at more events, and have a good night.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you all. It's a great program.
Thank you.